How long does it take for the value of real estate to double? This is a topic that media regularly reports, but never in a particularly informed or helpful way. Media often refers to the alleged industry standard that property doubles in value every 7 or 10 years. According to writers on the subject, the industry makes this claim that residential property doubles in value every 10 years or as fast as every 7 years. But I've never observed anyone in the real estate industry making that claim. It's something that media claims is said, but never provides any evidence. Now, we at Hotspotting certainly would never make that claim, as it's a ridiculous generalisation about real estate, which is based on the erroneous assumption that all property behaves the same in every location and at all times. As I've often commented, generalisation by journalists and by economists is the curse of Australian real estate consumers trying to understand real estate markets. It leads to a proliferation of dodgy data based on rubbery figures. Now, recently, the research entity PropTrack, in its relentless pursuit of free publicity in competition with CoreLogic, managed to muddy the waters even more by coming up with another shallow piece of computer-generated dodgy data, which claimed that property takes 15 years to double. Before examining what PropTrack published, let's make this clear. There is no definitive answer to the question of how long property takes to double in value, because the situation is constantly changing and it depends on the location you target and the time frame you choose. If you conduct a calculation today, it will be a different result to the one you would have got if you conducted the exercise on the same location at the end of, say, 2021, or if you did the calculation at the end of next year. It also depends on whose data you use, because median price numbers are the most rubbery figures of all. There are locations where the median price has doubled in the last 5 years, and some which have doubled in just 3 years, just as there are locations where it has taken 15 or 20 years for the median price to double. And there are places where the median house price is still considerably lower than it was a decade ago, and mostly these are mining-related towns where boom-bust scenarios are common. So let's look at what the desperate for publicity people at PropTrack managed to spit out of their computer system. PropTrack says that the national average situation, based on its median price figures and the time frame it chose, is that it's taken 15.4 years for the median house price to double to the current level of 730,000. In other words, the average situation in Australia was that 15.4 years ago, the median price was 365,000 and now it's 730,000. The average for the capital cities was 14.3 years, which means the median house price for capital city Australia was 410,000 14.3 years ago, and now it's 825,000. It's doubled in about 14 years. Now that suggests that the median price has increased at an average annual rate of 5.1% per year over those 14 years. But behind that generalised national figure, there are many local variations. Sydney, according to this data, doubled in 9.6 years, while Hobart managed to double in just 6.8 years. Regional Tasmania did even better, taking just 5.8 years for house values to double. Regional New South Wales also performed better than the national average, doubling in 9.4 years, followed closely by regional Victoria, which did it in 9.6 years. The slowest capital city, according to these figures, was Perth, which took almost 18 years to double its median house price. But that's because there was a recent 5 to 6 year period when Perth property values were falling. Right now, of course, Perth is the hottest market in the nation. So if they do the calculation again next year or the year after, the figures will probably show that Perth's time frame for doubling has reduced substantially. They're targeting some of the individual suburbs and towns around Australia. There are vastly different results depending on a location. CoreLogic figures indicate that the median house price for Byron Bay, which is currently over $3 million, is 108% higher than it was 3 years ago. In other words, it's more than doubled in just 3 years. At Sunshine Beach on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, the median house price currently is $2.85 million, which is 63% higher than it was 3 years ago and 146% higher than it was 5 years ago. So it has doubled in approximately 4 years. Thus, despite recent decline in its median price, as that market has passed its peak and tapered off in the past year or so. A year ago, the Sunshine Beach median price had more than doubled in 3 years. As a consumer, if you know the long-term capital growth rate for a suburb, you can easily work out how long it would take for prices to double if that long-term growth rate continued. You do it by using what we call the rule of 72. You simply divide the long-term growth rate into 72 to find out how many years it would take for prices to double if that growth rate was maintained. Now, for example, in the suburb of Blacktown in Western Sydney, the 10-year capital growth average, according to CoreLogic, is 9% a year. Based on the rule of 72, it would therefore take 8 years for values to double at that 9% growth rate. You divide 72 by 9 and the answer is 8 years. In the suburb of Sorrento, on the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria, on the southern fringe of Greater Melbourne, the 10-year capital growth average is 12.5% a year. And using the rule of 72, that means it would take less than 6 years for values to double if that growth rate was maintained into the future. On the other hand, the long-term growth rate for Surfers Paradise apartments is just 4.8% per year. And at that growth rate, it would take 15 years for values to double. Now, the Western Australian resources town of Port Hedland shows how it's all a case of lies, damn lies, and statistics. The median house price there has doubled in the past 5 years, but it's still lower than it was 10 years ago. Back in the resources investment boom days around 2012 and 2013, the median house price for Port Hedland was hovering around 1.2 million. Then when the boom ended, the median price dropped alarmingly to below 400,000. In recent years, it's recovered and is now, according to CoreLogic, 730,000. It's doubled in 5 years, but it's still well below that boom peak a decade ago. And it's an illustration of the reality that you can make statistics tell many different stories and often conflicting ones, and that you shouldn't place too much emphasis on what you hear or read in the media.